Welcome to the channel, where today we dive headfirst into one of the most confounding and obsessively studied mysteries in American numismatics, the 1999 P Jefferson nickel, a coin whose seemingly mundane surface belies a whirlwind of controversy, hidden anomalies, and unanswered questions that have haunted collectors and experts for over 2 decades, because what if a small mistake, barely noticeable to the untrained eye, made it one of the rarest coins ever struck, not by design, but by a confluence of errors so strange they seem almost intentional, almost whispered into existence by unseen hands inside the mint itself, hands perhaps too hurried, too distracted, or too bound by secrets to ever speak of what really happened on the production lines in Philadelphia that year, when the Jefferson nickel, a coin with a long and mostly uneventful history, suddenly became a lightning rod for theories, for scrutiny, and for obsession, when specimens began surfacing bearing ghost-like impressions, doubled profiles that shimmer at certain angles only to vanish when tilted, indistinct mint marks that appear to float, disappear, or even mimic incorrect types, with some collectors claiming to find phantom mint marks where only a P should exist, and others whispering of strike-throughs so subtle and precise they mimic ancient die trials or clandestine test strikes never meant to see daylight, of odd planchet surfaces that shimmer unnaturally as if part copper, part nickel, and something else altogether, raising the terrifying question: was there an experimental alloy mixed into a small batch that somehow got struck into circulation, a chemical fingerprint of a trial program erased from official logs but lingering in metal? And why did at least 2 coins found in the Midwest show visible signs of die clash in reverse, the Monticello details echoed faintly onto Jefferson's head, almost like a mirrored ghost haunting its own reflection? And how could these specific errors have passed through layers of inspection unless someone, somewhere, either ignored them or deliberately looked away, or perhaps never saw them because these errors existed only for a moment, in a single sheet of blanks fed into a machine with a misaligned die, quickly corrected but not before birthing a handful of anomalies that now fuel late-night forums and collector groups worldwide, with blurry images and whispered testimonies of finds pulled from old coffee cans, flea market jars, or grandparents' junk drawers, each carrying that electric potential that this might be one of those 1999 P nickels, the ones that shouldn't exist, with Jefferson's hair doubled just above the ear in a way that isn't listed in any mint report, with inscriptions slightly off-axis, devices inexplicably thicker or thinner than standard, with rim cuts forming perfect semicircular notches as if the die cracked and healed between strikes, and then there's the disturbing consistency of certain specimens having initials missing altogether, FS simply gone from the field beneath Monticello, not faded but seemingly never present, as though an unfinished die was used, then swapped out before records were finalized, raising new doubts about whether the official die count for that year is even accurate, and if it isn't, what else might be off? How many undocumented die varieties were struck in haste, under pressure, maybe as part of a covert batch printed during off-hours or test runs related to new mint equipment upgrades rumored to have been installed in '99, upgrades never fully accounted for in public documentation? And then we must ask what prompted that year's sudden uptick in die degradation on nickels alone, and why Jefferson's face appears unusually soft in strike on certain batches but sharply detailed on others from the same minting period, and whether these visual inconsistencies stem from a deeper, unreported issue in die steel composition or press calibration, and if so, were these errors the result of simple oversight, or something more strategic, something tied to whispered accounts of a retired mint employee who once claimed he handled a tray of nickels with visibly flawed reverses marked for destruction, only to discover days later that some were gone, unaccounted for, never officially destroyed, only to reappear years later in coin shops in Ohio and upstate New York, sparking a frenzy of re-examination that turned ordinary hobbyists into detectives, archivists, and in some cases full-time seekers of that one elusive specimen, the perfect error, the Rosetta Stone of the 1999 P nickel anomaly, which some believe carries micro-engraved features invisible without magnification, possibly initials or marks hidden within Monticello's steps, marks that could suggest clandestine testing of advanced engraving methods or even unauthorized artistic modifications. And if that theory is true, then what we have is not just a minting mistake, but a message, a signature, buried in nickel and copper meant to be found by those obsessive enough to notice. And isn't that the heart of this story, the way a single year, a single mint mark, and a single denomination became the focal point of feverish obsession and doubt, where every shadowed edge and misaligned rim seems to whisper a secret, where no one knows exactly how many of these strange nickels are out there, or if the mint ever truly catalogued the full extent of its own output during that pivotal year, a year teetering on the edge of a new millennium, when systems were being overhauled, staff reshuffled, protocols rewritten, and perhaps amid that chaos, a few forgotten dies, a few experimental blanks, a few off-center presses slipped through unnoticed or deliberately ignored, left to circulate among billions of normal nickels like ghost fragments of a larger story waiting to be decoded by whoever dares to look closely enough. And maybe that's why every coin collector who's ever paused on a 1999 P nickel, turned it over in their palm, held it under a lamp, tilted it just so, has felt that jolt, that quiet, breathless moment when you wonder if this is one of them, the nickel that doesn't fit the pattern, that defies explanation, that refuses to be ordinary, and makes you ask not just how it happened, but why no one seems to want to talk about it, why it's always been footnoted, obscured, deflected, why no official error guidebook has ever fully documented the full breadth of its strange traits, leaving us to wonder if the real records, if they exist, are still buried somewhere inside the vaults of the mint, or perhaps in the mind of a lone die engraver who vanished into retirement with secrets he swore never to reveal. And so the mystery deepens with every new report, every auction photo that hints at yet another unexplained variation, every late-night post describing a discovery that shouldn't exist, until we're left with only one conclusion, that the 1999 P Jefferson nickel is not just a coin, but a riddle, a relic of a moment in time when the machinery of history misfired, and in doing so, opened a doorway into something much stranger, something still unfolding, and possibly, still out there. Next. Today we delve into a numismatic mystery that has confounded experts, haunted forums, and sparked an underground frenzy among collectors for nearly 2 decades, the baffling, obsessively pursued enigma of the 2006 P Jefferson nickel, a coin born in a year of monumental transition, veiled in redesigns and modernization, and yet inexplicably at the center of a swarm of anomalies so profound, so structurally and historically inconsistent, that they defy explanation and raise a terrifying question. What if a small mistake made it one of the rarest coins ever struck, not just rare in form or finish, but rare in origin, rare in intention, as if forged not entirely by human hands but by the chaotic collision of oversight, experimentation, and concealed decision-making inside the deepest halls of the U.S. Mint, where in 2006, amid the aftermath of the Westward Journey series and the return to Monticello, something went wrong, or right, depending on your perspective, and unleashed into circulation a cryptic string of nickels whose features twist reality, break the norms of production, and spark chilling speculation about just how many secret dies were used, how many redesigns were shelved at the last second, and whether some of them made it into the presses anyway under the cover of midnight shifts and undocumented test strikes that have since disappeared from public record. Because among the many reported anomalies tied to the 2006 P Jefferson nickel, none are more disorienting than the recurring but unconfirmed presence of doubled letters in I in God We Trust, letters that seem to vibrate under magnification as if stamped twice, possibly by a deteriorated die or misaligned hub, possibly by something no one has publicly admitted was ever in use, and then there are the specimens with vanishing FS initials on Monticello's base, initials that should be there, that are always there in a standard strike, but in some coins, they seem to dissolve into the metal. Not worn or faded but completely absent, as if an unfinished die made it into production and no one noticed, or someone noticed and buried the documentation, and in at least a dozen sightings from Texas to New Hampshire, collectors claim to have found 2006 P nickels with mint marks shaped oddly, pinched at the top or offset just enough to resemble either a D or a ghosted S. An impossible feat for a Philadelphia strike unless, of course, dies were shared, swapped, or misapplied in the confusion of a new die setting protocol initiated that year, and suddenly we must ask, was 2006 more than a design return? Was it also a covert testing year, a year of rogue experimentation with die alignment, with hub strength, with altered die faces meant to prepare for digital engraving techniques still in their infancy? And if so, did the Mint's evolving tech leave behind unintended artifacts in the form of mismatched details, like the Jefferson profile that appears slightly elongated on some 2006 P nickels, his jaw softened, eye misaligned, and ponytail bunched unnaturally low, suggesting either extreme die wear or the use of an alternative master hub that was meant to be discarded but somehow remained in rotation, and this only deepens the puzzle when you examine the rim cuts that have emerged in alarming frequency on this coin, crescent-like breaks where the die cracked under pressure, leaving signs of stress that don't match typical fatigue patterns for that year's die steel formula. Meaning the composition itself may have changed without clear announcement, possibly in response to internal experiments with striking pressure and speed as part of a quiet move toward high-speed coining, a shift that could explain the irregular strike depths, where some coins show razor-sharp features while others look muddled, as if cast through a fog, and it's that inconsistency that continues to haunt advanced collectors, who have dedicated years to building specimen databases and photo logs, trying to map out the unexplained die states of the 2006 P, only to find contradictions that grow more troubling with each comparison, like the case of the Minnesota collector who discovered a nickel with visible reverse clash marks, Monticello's dome faintly mirrored into Jefferson's cheek, a phenomenon almost unheard of since the 1970s, prompting metallurgical analysis that revealed microstriations inconsistent with standard die polishing. And then there are the unconfirmed but persistent stories of full brockages, struck through errors with foreign debris, planchets that exhibit slight but undeniable discoloration under spectrographic scanning, implying the possibility that a test batch of blanks, perhaps with altered nickel-copper ratios, were slipped into the press line in Philadelphia during a week when press maintenance logs curiously vanished from digital archives, and no one seems to know why, or how, or whether the sudden disappearance of that documentation connects to the unexplained resignation of a longtime mint technician whose name appears nowhere after March 2006, and if this sounds like the makings of conspiracy, understand that numismatics is a field where silence often speaks loudest, where unexplained errors don't just happen, they slip through in moments of transition, when accountability can be muddled. And so when a collector in Georgia discovered a 2006 P nickel with full step details on Monticello, despite coming from a roll filled with flatly struck piers, it reignited the theory that certain dies were specially prepared, possibly for high-profile sample strikes, but ended up used in mass production, contaminating circulation with pieces of exquisite detail that blur the line between intentional mintage and uncontrolled release. And yet more troubling are the specimens bearing what appear to be repunched mint marks, tiny serifs etched beneath or beside the P, visible only under high magnification and likely resulting from a clash between old manual punching traditions and new automated systems implemented that same year, a clash that produced hybrid anomalies neither modern nor traditional, and therein lies the truth that numismatists can't ignore. 2006 was a year of hybridization, of incomplete changeovers, of legacy systems bumping into technological upgrades, and coins struck during such years often become unwitting messengers of confusion, especially when coupled with reports of rotated dies, some off by nearly 30 degrees, where the obverse and reverse no longer align in harmony, as if the press had lost its bearings and no one noticed because of the mint's desperate push to meet production quotas after a multi-week delay caused by a known software glitch in the engraving to hubbing workflow. And all this may help explain why the edge inscriptions, or lack thereof, show faint markings under infrared that shouldn't exist on a nickel at all, possibly residue from an unrecorded attempt at edge tooling integration later reserved for dollar coins. And if that's true, then the 2006 P Jefferson nickel is more than just a design anomaly, it's an artifact of procedural chaos, a remnant of policy transitions and production trials that collided in metal and escaped into the public unnoticed, where it waits in pocket change, junk drawers, old rolls, and forgotten coin jars to be discovered by someone with a sharp enough eye to recognize the asymmetry of the serif on the R in Liberty, or the slightly misaligned curve of Jefferson's eye socket, or the unnatural plateau of the steps beneath Monticello that appear flattened not from wear but from an aberrant die fill likely caused by trapped grease or degraded die polish never recorded in any technician's maintenance log. And when a New York coin club unearthed 3 such specimens during a late-night sorting session, the buzz quickly spread to online forums, where theories blossomed into obsession, and whispers of a lost die trial, an ultra high-relief Jefferson intended for future production but accidentally struck and released in 2006, gained traction, particularly after a Freedom of Information Act request returned redacted pages mentioning unauthorized die use and experimental strike inconsistencies, with no further detail, leaving collectors to decode the clues buried in the nickel itself, a coin that hides more than it reveals, that acts as a cipher for a moment in mint history when change was not just imminent, but unsteady, when the old gave way to the new and in the process, bled strange hybrids into circulation that will never be fully explained, only theorized, only pursued, with each new discovery pulling us deeper into a maze of mirror brockages, phantom initials, unlisted die varieties, and the creeping realization that the most extraordinary coins are not the ones displayed in museums but the ones lying in plain sight, whispering their secrets to those who dare to listen. Last. Today we unravel the chillingly intricate, obsessively pursued mystery of the 1987 P Jefferson nickel, a seemingly ordinary 5-cent coin that, against all logic, may harbor one of the most tangled and unresolved enigmas in U.S. mint history, because what if a small mistake made it one of the rarest coins ever struck, not by rare mintage numbers or low survival rates, but by an invisible thread of bizarre inconsistencies, unacknowledged die varieties, and near-mythical minting errors that have gnawed at the edge of collector consciousness for decades, quietly building a legend around a coin whose true story is buried not just beneath the metal, but within the hushed silences of archival omissions, redacted documents, and the haunted testimonies of those who've handled specimens so anomalous that even veteran numismatists have been left speechless, staring into the coin's dull nickel sheen and wondering whether they've stumbled onto something that was never meant to be found, never meant to be minted, and maybe, just maybe, never even meant to exist, because the deeper you look into the 1987 P Jefferson nickel, the more impossible details emerge: die clashes where none should be, Monticello impressions inverted into Jefferson's jawline, doubling so faint and strange it seems spectral, like a whisper frozen in metal, and countless coins reported with missing or malformed FS initials, an eerie absence not due to wear but seemingly struck from a die never properly finished. And how did such a die pass inspection in an era of strict procedural control, unless it wasn't inspected at all, or worse, was fast-tracked through a secretive internal process related to 1987's unexplained delays in die delivery and the mysterious recall of multiple press machines from the Philadelphia Mint that spring, a moment when production anomalies spiked without public explanation? And yet the official records speak only of routine maintenance, even as off-center strikes and partial blockage appeared in enough volume to suggest more than coincidence. And what of the collector from Ohio who in 2003 revealed a 1987 P nickel struck on a thin planchet with a bluish tint, possibly indicating an experimental alloy never officially recorded, raising terrifying questions about whether 1987 was used to test new blanks without congressional approval, and if so, how many such coins made it past destruction? How many circulated unnoticed, embedded in decades of pocket change and bank rolls, their subtle wrongness visible only to those who look closely, very closely, at the oddly compressed legends, the ever-so-slight tilt in Jefferson's bust alignment, or the ghost of an extra column in Monticello's portico that appears and disappears under oblique lighting, hinting at a die that either cracked, clashed, or was replaced mid-run without proper logging. And what could explain the handful of 1987 P nickels that show strong evidence of repunched mint marks, despite the mint's insistence that such practices had ceased by that time? And could this be proof that older, retired dies were hurriedly pulled back into service amid some undocumented crisis, or was it the work of rogue engravers quietly resisting policy changes that had dehumanized the art of coin design into automated standardization? And then there are the whispered accounts, scattered across decades, of rolls found in bank vaults or estate sales, all dated 1987, all from Philadelphia, all containing coins with obverse devices slightly enlarged or oddly skewed, suggesting that a test hub may have been used, a prototype meant to trial modified striking pressure or hub depth, and the theory only deepens when you examine the Mint's internal restructuring that year, when multiple departments merged, training procedures were revised, and new hires were brought in to run aging equipment during a time when funding cuts forced the Mint to operate with outdated presses long past their replacement dates. And suddenly the sudden uptick in mechanical doubling, weak strikes, and planchet defects in 1987 P nickels no longer feels like statistical noise, it begins to feel like a story, an unspoken narrative of improvisation, error, and perhaps deliberate obfuscation, because how else do we explain the handful of coins exhibiting clash marks that seem to depict devices from earlier design years, including a 1985 Monticello outline embedded behind the 1987 Jefferson bust, as though old dies were partially ground down and reused in desperation, or worse, used deliberately to create hybrids for reasons no one has yet explained? And could this be the missing link that explains the sudden appearance in 1988 of radically cleaner strikes and altered spacing in the mottos, a quiet visual reboot that Mint officials attributed to equipment improvements but never explained in detail? And yet if those improvements were truly rolled out in 1988, how did they leave a fingerprint on the coins of 1987 unless pre-production trials were being run in secret, coins struck not for release but never pulled from circulation either? And this begins to tie into the mysterious reports from two retired Mint employees, never named, only referenced in FOIA request replies, who claimed that certain batches of Philadelphia nickels were misallocated in early 1987 due to an internal cataloging error that affected die tracking logs and resulted in several presses running undocumented die pairs for up to a week before corrections were made. And if true, this would mean there are coins out there struck from combinations never officially acknowledged, pairing reverse dies with alignment pegs offset by degrees that produced what some collectors now call the tilted dome effect, where Monticello's roof appears subtly slanted and light warps unnaturally across the fields. And you have to wonder, were these true errors, Or were they early experiments with anti-counterfeiting microdistortion? Features that failed and were scrapped, and if so, why did traces of them leak into circulation instead of being destroyed as protocol demanded? And could this relate to the handful of 1987 P nickels that have been discovered bearing a second, nearly invisible profile line in Jefferson's jaw? A contour that aligns not with the official portrait but with an older design prototype archived in the Mints and Used Sketches vault. And does this mean someone, an engraver, a technician, a rogue idealist, resurrected that sketch, etched it quietly into a working die, and struck a few hundred or a few thousand coins before anyone noticed, creating a trail of ghost coins whose features do not belong to any officially sanctioned design? And if so, how far does this go? How many people knew, and why did quality control not catch it, or did they, and were silenced by internal pressure not to report errors during a politically sensitive budget cycle that year? And this possibility is not as far-fetched as it seems when you consider the 1987 Treasury memo vaguely referencing production anomalies requiring low-level discretion, a phrase that appears nowhere else in public record, and yet explains the sheer number of outlier 1987 P specimens showing conflicting font thicknesses in E pluribus unum, varying by as much as half a point stroke weight from one coin to the next, a variance impossible to attribute solely to die wear or metal fatigue. And could it be that different engraving machines were being tested simultaneously, each creating microvariations invisible to the general public but now lighting up under forensic digital mapping, revealing differences in curve smoothness, angle precision, and serif sharpness that point to at least 3 or 4 discrete engraving sources feeding into production without being disclosed? And what does that mean for the authenticity of our understanding of the 1987 P series, and are we even looking at a single coin anymore or a mosaic of coexisting realities pressed into 5 grams of alloy, each bearing the signature of human error, technological transition, and institutional secrecy? And as we peel back these layers, we're not just exploring a coin, we're entering a world where every mark is a clue, every imperfection a breadcrumb, every unrecorded die clash or strange planchet tint a whisper from the void telling us that the story of the 1987 P Jefferson nickel is not finished, and maybe never will be, because somewhere out there, still undiscovered, still jingling in forgotten drawers or sealed inside unsearched rolls, lies the piece that completes the puzzle, a nickel whose existence confirms everything the records deny, everything the Mint refuses to speak about, and everything the most devoted collectors have always suspected, that sometimes, the rarest coin is the one history tried to erase.